Okay, so in this video we're going to have a look at the evaluation points, this time for the ultradian and infradian rhythms. It's unlikely to ever get ultradian and infradian rhythms separately, so we have combined the evaluation points to keep your life easier. I think it'd be more likely it'd be an application question than a 16-mark describe and evaluate question. So strength of ultradian and infradian rhythms is they're supported by the evolutionary approach. So particularly when applying it to McClintock's research and the idea of period synchronization, there's a suggestion that if all women who are in a group together period synchronized, they'll all be fertile at the same time, they'll all give birth at the same time, and they can all care for the children at the same time. So the focus of the group will be caring for the children, so like a bit like a cave person daycare. And then obviously talk about why this is strength, because if it's supported by a well recognized and well acknowledged psychological theory, then it increases the validity or the suggestion of infradian and ultradian rhythms. However, there has been research that well, not research, but people who have gone against this because it doesn't actually seem very sensible. If you want, the main focus of people, according to the evolutionary approach, is the survival of their most immediate genes, and then after that, of course, then it then does extend out to their species, to their race. However, first to their race, to their species, etc., etc. However, the first and foremost, they care about their own children and their own genetic survival. So in this case, it would not make sense for everyone to be fertile at the same time. You would want to be the only child. You would want to be the only. Your child would want to be the only child, so that everyone could care for that child instead. If there's one child under the age of 1 that everybody's looking after and caring for, it increases their survival much more greatly than if there's 10 people looking after 10 babies, or 10 people looking after one baby who's more likely to survive. So that reduces the validity of that theory. Evidence to support the stages of sleep exists. Emmett and Klimt a very famous psychological study. It is mentioned in the A3 sheets, and if I were you, I'd make notes of the additional findings. However, the key finding was that REM correlated directly with dreams. So rapid eye movement sleep, which happens in stage 5, was directly correlated with dreaming, and also people who were woken up during REM sleep were much able to remember dreams in much more detail. So that links in with our belief that there's the 90-stage cycle, sleep cycle, 90-minute cycle of sleep. However, it was a very small sample size, a sample size of 9 people, so you can talk about whether that's representative or not. And there are also comments in the book about replication, so you could extend that even further. So with this one, a lot of the evaluation points, you would get the marks by having however sentences and going into lots more detail with that than maybe having too many of the evaluation points. And of course, there's practical applications. We know that lots of melatonin, if you need lots of melatonin because it's dark at night, it eats up lots of serotonin, because melatonin is metabolizes serotonin to make melatonin. So there is phototherapy, which is a seasonal affective disorder light. It's available. You can also watch the YouTube review. The man at the beginning does seem a bit odd, however, he then I think it was a bit of a joke, and then he picks up and he's a bit more. So give it the first useful. So give it the first 30 seconds before you have a watch of a review of a sad light. Now there's lots of scientific kind of debate around this, but the idea is that if you shine light in your face, then it might reduce the amount of melatonin being created, and therefore allow your serotonin stores, depleted serotonin stores, to increase again, because it's just like it mirrors the idea of the sun, so it extends your day slightly as well. And of course, it can be, if those theories, that theory can be applied to the real world and has been shown to work, and some people it is valid, it is a product that exists, then obviously it increases the validity of the theory. Now, endogenous pacemakers, exogenous zeitgebers, and circadian rhythms. There could be 3 ways you could be asked this question. Describe and evaluate circadian rhythms, where you can talk about sleep-wake cycle, hormone production, and body temperature, and endogenous pacemakers and exogenous zeitgebers. Or you could be asked to evaluate endogenous pacemakers, where you talk about the sleep-wake cycle, so only sleep-wake cycle, not the other circadian rhythms, and endogenous pacemakers. And you'd use exogenous zeitgebers as an evaluation point, or the other way around if it's exogenous zeitgebers. And you can flip any of these evaluation points in any way that you want. So the animal studies support the idea that endogenous pacemakers help regulate our sleep-wake cycle. So they support endogenous pacemakers. However, if your question was about exogenous zeitgebers, you could say they oppose exogenous zeitgebers, and you just have to change the end sentence. So thinking about them as supporting endogenous pacemakers, animal studies, the Corsi destroyed the SCN in a small rodent. I think it was either a chipmunk or a hamster. I think it was chipmunks, and he found that those animals lost their sleep-wake cycle and were more likely to be killed and eaten in the wild because they weren't asleep when it was it was dark and therefore it was difficult for them to hide. You could hear them rustling around, and they were easier prey and they got eaten. Ralph also bred hamsters to have a mutant hamster to have a 20-hour sleep-wake cycle instead of a 24 sleep-wake cycle, and he transplanted the SCNs from those mutant hamsters into hamsters that did have originally have the traditional 24-hour cycle, and he found that their sleep-wake cycle changed to 20 hours. Both of these suggest that the SCN endogenous pacemakers are absolutely vital in regulating the sleep-wake cycle. However, and then you have methodological issues below, there are problems with animal studies because of extrapolation, and here are just some facts that you can consider, and it could be absolutely any that you use. But for example, sloths sleep from 16 to 9 hours, which is obviously hopefully not what humans do, so the length of time to which we sleep is very, very different. Unihemispheric sleep means there are actually animals, and I think dolphins is one of them, where each hemisphere of the brain sleeps, so they never actually truly sleep completely like we do, where they lay down, shut their eyes because they're in the water, or lots of different reasons. They'll be eaten by predators, so each half of the brain goes to sleep instead, which is completely different to humans, so you can't extrapolate information from animals onto humans. In relation to REM and non-REM sleep, a platypus has 60% of their sleep is REM, whereas in humans it's 20 to 25%, so that's very, very different. Sleep disorders, you generally don't see those in animals, and you do in humans. And then you could also talk about animal ethics, and I have put 2 really useful links, one to the British Psychological Society and another one to Psychology Wizard, which is a brilliant website, and it's so unfortunate that they look at OCR or Edexcel instead of AQA, because they would be incredibly handy. The level of detail they go into is brilliant, so there is some crossover. It's worth having a look at, so I can't recommend that website enough. Okay, so there are lots of ethical issues. And then there is something opposing exogenous site gabers. Supporting exogenous site gabers and opposing endogenous pacemakers. So you'd use it however you need to, and that is the idea that it goes beyond the master clock. So there are other things needed in place as well. So we're just saying it's just the SCN that regulates sleep, nothing else. There's a pineal gland, etc., that's linked to it. However, there has been research to suggest there are peripheral oscillators, mini body clocks all around the body, and there's a list of them in the book. I can't remember exactly what they are now. Maybe kidney, liver, adrenal gland, I can't remember, but they're in several different places if you just check your book. So it suggests that actually if we're just focusing on the SCN, that's not the case. There is a huge number of very complex things within our body. And then we've got Damiloa, who found that changing feeding patterns in mice, this links to the stomach and the liver peripheral oscillator, then changed their sleep-wake cycle, suggesting that exogenous site gabers can have a huge influence on our body, and not just exogenous site gabers that work with the SCN, but from different ways as well. And if you think about Campbell and Murphy, light on the back of the knee was something else that altered their behaviour as well. However, you could argue, and if you want to hear with confounding variables for Campbell and Murphy, you could argue the people who had light shone on the back of the knee possibly still was able to see some light through their eyes as well, which would then link with the SCN, so that could change their behaviour too. Okay, so they are, and then that goes against the idea it's just the SCN, supports the idea of exogenous site gabers. You could use it however you want. And then finally at the bottom it says interactionalist, and there is some information in the book about this as well, but it's the idea, ultimately the theory that holds the most validity is that the two always work together. So there have been isolation studies. We've got a sheriff who put himself in a cave and didn't allow himself access to any external light at all, any exogenous site gabers, and we had a look at his cycle, and it was running on 25-hour, and he didn't quite know. He thought it was August when it was September. So we can look at that, look at things like that and talk about, is it exogenous site gabers, endogenous pacemakers. However, ultimately that's very artificial in design. It's fake. Actually, in reality, through most of our lives, we have exogenous site gabers and endogenous pacemakers and exogenous site gabers that work together hand in hand, and that's the most valid kind of theory, that one isn't more significant than the other. They both work equally to control our sleep-wake cycle. Okay. Any questions? Please let me know. Otherwise, well done for making it to the end of biopsychology.